for part two of Trot Talk with Alex Grant. Today we're going to be talking about Trotskyism, why Trotskyism, talk about the where it came from, out of Bolshevism, what was the context, and talk about what a Trotskyist party is, what does it mean to be a Trotskyist in the landscape of the political landscape, really. So, Alex, why don't you get us started and take it away?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eamon. Great to be back on the show. And well, actually, maybe I'll first answer the question. You get people going, "Oh, why do you worship all these people? Why do you worship Lenin? Why do you worship Marx? Why do you worship Trotsky?" And the fact is, we don't. We don't at all. We don't worship these individuals. They are very powerful individuals with great ideas and really interesting life stories. But what it really comes down to, it is just a ideological shorthand. When people ask me, what am I? My first answer is usually a Marxist. I'll say I'm a revolutionary socialist or a communist. And I'll only say I'm a Trotskyist if somebody asks. So, are you a Trotskyist? Yes, I am. But it's when I say that, what I'm saying is that my ideas and ideology are consistent with the theoretical body. It's not because I worship some guy, although I think he was a very interesting person. I really recommend to everybody read his autobiography, My Life. It's incredibly inspiring book, incredibly interesting. It almost reads like a novel. You know, he escaped from Siberia twice. He was in exile so three times. Uh, Led the Civil War, led the Russian Revolution. So it's really very, very inspiring. But that's not what we're talking about. I just wanted to address the sort of focus on individuals. The irony of it, we're opposed to the great men view of history. So, you know, uh, I'm not a Trotskyist because I think Trotsky was a great man. I do think he was a great man, but there were times in history where played a pivotal role, and there were times in history where he couldn't do anything because the forces of history were just too strong. So, what is Trotskyism? Well, I think it follows very clearly from Bolshevism. So, in fact, the first Trotskyists denied they were Trotskyists. It was a Stalinist slur against the Trotskyists to call them Trotskyites. You're a Trotskyite. It's still a slur, a trot. In Britain, I don't know if it exists like that in Canada, the United States, but do you know what the trots are, Eamon?
In Britain?
Yeah.
Well, Trots are Trotskyites. What do you mean?
No, do you know what the trots are in common parlance?
No,
No, it's a word for diarrhea.
you're kidding me.
You've got the trots. Yeah.
I did not know that. I
Yes.
learned something.
So, yeah, a little bit of education into British scatology.
That's good.
Anyway, there, I've given our enemies some more insults to pour on us. Good for them. Anyway, but the first Trotskyists called themselves Bolshevik Leninists, continuing the legacy of Bolshevism and the ideas of Lenin. And that is accurate. So, what is, again, to summarize last week, what is Bolshevism is an understanding for a need for revolution and a need for a revolutionary party, a disciplined revolutionary organization to help the masses win victory because it can't just happen spontaneously. The revolutionary moment is a short period of time. It can be come and gone within 12 months, 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, even. And so you only get to have so many mistakes before everything goes terribly badly. So you need a revolutionary organization that can help learn the lessons of history, be a focal point for the energy of the masses, and help the masses to make the minimum number of mistakes. So that is what Bolshevism is in essence. The need for a revolutionary party, a party of a new type that unites all sectors of the working class, all sectors of the oppressed, and creates that the sharp spear point to hit against the bourgeois and the imperialist enemy.
Just to interrupt,
Cool.
how does that? We talked about Bolshevism last week, but how does the Bolshevism conception of the need for the party differ from how communist parties were were formulated in around the time of the First International in the
Right.
yeah.
Well, the First International wasn't really it wasn't a mass organization. So the First International was quite an ideological hodgepodge that you had Marx and Engels fighting for their conception, scientific socialism, that they called it at the time. But you had the anarchists in there, and you had reformist British trade unionists. So it was a big ideological confrontation and never a mass organization, right? And then the Second International was a mass organization based upon Marxist ideas, but it degenerated into reformism. I explained this last time, how there was this big division between trade union politics and party politics, electoral politics, and never the twain shall meet. So it had that sort of division between industrial and political struggle, which was a huge mistake. Uh, and so, it was quite diffuse, to say the least. So Lenin formulated the Revolutionary Party on a much more disciplined basis, on the basis of democratic centralism. Do you think I should go into democratic centralism
Yeah,
now?
let's use this opportunity to talk about democratic centralism with respect to the Bolsheviks and the critique from outside groups, especially leftists, that it's basically a road to authoritarianism and shutting down opposition within the party, and just kind of yeah. Go.
I think democratic centralism is the only way to organize a genuine democracy of action. It's the only genuine democracy, and I would challenge anyone to show me a system that is more democratic. If you look at the sort of present political parties and trade unions and social democratic parties, socialist parties, etc., they're run under a system that I'd characterize as bureaucratic centralism. That are You could debate sometimes. Some of these parties are highly dictatorial, but the sort of, I guess, the more democratic ones, you can debate anything. You can say anything, right? And it makes absolutely no difference to the direction of the leadership clique. The leadership clique does whatever the hell they want, no matter what the rank and file say. And that is the fact on every single political party on the planet. Bureaucratic centralism. Mm-hmm. Despite any sort of window dressing. Alternatively, you get the anarchist conception of, I guess, the extreme anarchist conception. There's many anarchisms. There's as many anarchisms as there are anarchists. But the extreme anarchist conception is not, well, the negation of democracy in a way. It's just everybody does whatever they feel like, right? Consensus, just consensus and consensus. But that is actually minority rule. And taken to its logical conclusion, a recipe for paralysis. I'm old enough to remember the Occupy movement. It's actually a while ago now. It came about, I think, what was it, 2011? And that allowed anybody to veto anything. And it was excuse my language, a shit show. Nothing got done. It was talking and talking and talking and talking. And actually that ends up being not democratic at all, because if a meeting goes beyond an hour or two and it's just talking and talking, well, it's the privileged layers that can stick around for hours and hours and hours until 3 a.m. just talking, who get to decide. Any worker who's got to go to the work the next day, any mother who has to look after their kids, parent who has to look after their kids, anybody with those kind of obligations can't stick around. It's the petty bourgeois students. It's people with time, people with a bit more money can stick around and talk forever. And those are the ones who end up deciding. So a genuine working class democracy has got to come to a decision within a reasonable period of time so people can get on with their lives and there is some action. Because democracy without action, talk without action, is no democracy at all. It is just talk and talk and talk and talk. The point is to do something. And that's what democratic centralism is. It is a unity, a dialectical unity, Marxist philosophy, we haven't talked about that yet, dialectical unity of debate, discussion, education on the one side, and action, and then reaction to then appraise the success or otherwise of the action that you took. It's been likened to the democracy of a strike, that complete freedom of democracy in debate, up to a vote, and then unity in action. So that's the democracy of strike. Workers deciding whether to go on strike or not. Let's say they vote 70% to go on strike. Well, 100% of those workers have to respect that picket line, or you would never get a successful strike, and you would be scabbing for the benefit of the bosses. So this is how a revolutionary organization can maximize its social weight, that you gain the right to debate within an organization amongst peers, and then you get unity of action, right? Which differs massively from the rest of the labor movement, where the leadership clique decides everything. Right? There's no democracy of action. The votes of the rank and file don't decide the action. It's just the leadership clique decide everything. Now, and sometimes you have a debate and a vote and you end up in a minority. It actually defends democratic centralism, defends minority rights, because you got up and said, oh, look, I think this is a mistake, or I think we could do X, Y, Z instead of A, B, C. Right? And then you lost the vote. The organization goes off and does what it wishes to do. And then you'll see the repercussion. Maybe you're proved right. Maybe you're proved wrong. Proved right. You get to tell everybody, I told you so, and everybody learns something. And then the next vote will be on a higher political level.
Right? So I think the criticisms tend to be more along the lines of, in theory, the ideals of democratic centralism are great, but in practice, what ends up happening is something different. They'll say that you end up with a clique, a leadership anyway, who have kind of all the experience, most of the knowledge, and the know-how, and the influence, whereas the rest of the party, the membership, maybe their levels are pretty low. They're more attuned to just kind of following along, voting along with what the leadership has to say. You get a lot of unanimous votes and not a lot of significant or real debate about issues that then maybe people are afraid to speak up because they think everybody else is voting this way, and I'm not smart enough to challenge these people. So you end up with the same leadership kind of over and over again, and you have kind of unanimous votes down the line.
Well, first of all, bureaucratic centralism doesn't stop any of that either. Neither does pure anarchism stop any of that. In fact, anarchist organizations, they still make decisions. They still do stuff. But a lot of those discussions actually get done in back rooms, unaccountable. You get the strongest forceful individual who ends up pushing their will through. And that's why you also get a lot of anarchist organizations collapse, because eventually you get to a certain size and you can only have so many strong individuals in a room before they start clashing. right? So the other forms are no better. Actually, if you were to contrast this with anarchism, the anarchists, in terms of democratic forms, they fetishize constitutions. They think with the perfect constitution, you could have perfect democracy.
Mm.
Whereas Marxists say actually history matters more. You can have a perfect constitution and an organization can still degenerate because it's not in the constitution, it's in the people, right?
In the conditions.
And in the conditions, exactly. So, and that explains the degeneration of the Soviet Union. Uh, Soviet Union and the Russian Communist Party and the Communist International degenerated despite having the most democratic constitution on the planet Earth at the time. They did because it had absolutely nothing to do with the pieces of paper, the statutes. History is not made by pieces of paper. History is made by people, by classes, by social relations, by mass forces, by economics, world politics, and these factors, not by constitutions. So, I defend democratic centralism as the best way to run a revolutionary organization, but I'll also say it's not a magic wand. It's not going to stop you an organization from degeneration if the social conditions lead in that direction.
Okay, good. So let's talk about the possibility of that. Actually, first of all, was democratic centralism always a principle of the Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik Party, or
Yes.
was it enshrined later?
No, that was well, in a way, it was the best traditions of the First and Second International, but there was a lot of inconsistencies and wishy-washiness in the First and Second International. So Lenin applied it very consistently and codified it back in when he was uh, formulating how the Russian revolutionaries uh, should be organized with works like Where to Begin and What is to Be Done, written in sort of 1902 and 1903, right? And eventually leading up to the Bolshevik Menshevik split. So Lenin was for a consistent application of democratic centralism, whereas a lot of these other groups, yeah, they actually agreed with it on paper, but didn't consistently apply it.
So, okay, I'll read out then one of Paul Maddox's critiques, and he quotes Trotsky, actually, where Trotsky pointed out that even before the revolution, the Central Committee was almost entirely in the hands of Lenin, according to Trotsky. So, so Maddox says that the ideals of democratic centralism were therefore a sham from the beginning, really, and quickly reversed even further as early as 1918, as power concentrated around Lenin and those who did not openly disagree with him, and the resulting Stalinist machine must have been an oversight by Lenin. So he's being sarcastic here.
You know what? Democracy, unanimity is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. You should be disagreeing for disagreement's sake. If you have an ideological unity, that is a good thing. Have an organization of educated revolutionaries who know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and on the important questions agree on that, and have an ideological consistency, that is good. Although as an experienced Marxist, there's no 100% unanimity. There never is. There's always differences of shading and elements of grey. There's no absolute unity, and there should be no mindless unity. It's not just a right; it's a duty of a revolutionary to disagree when they see something they don't agree, or they see something they don't understand.
So how do we or Trotskyists in Trotskyist parties or organizations
Mhm.
ensure that there is not this mindless going along, and there is this a better level of engagement and understanding, so that people can really take advantage of the democratic centralism and not allow it to degenerate like we've seen in so many tendencies and parties.
There's no guarantee. You can't insure it. It sucks. There's no guarantee. No guarantee in life. There's no guarantee in
What can
politics.
you do to help it though?
You can ensure you can always have an educated critical membership, and you foster a democratic culture that people have both the right and the obligation to raise questions and are not and those questions and concerns are welcomed and not browbeat, right? So it is a culture that needs to be fostered, a democratic culture. I firmly believe in that. And but there is no guarantee. And also there is a dynamic to the class struggle. Like sometimes there are periods when you need to sit and reappraise. And other times there are periods when you need to act, right? And and that is about building an educated leadership. So this idea that leadership doesn't matter. It's like, oh, why is it all the people who've been around so long? I may as well ask people, um, why are professors in university the people who've been studying the longest? Surely an undergraduate could give the lecture just as well as Stephen Hawking's, right? No, no. Knowledge is something that is accumulated over time. Knowledge, and there is a selection in a party as well. There's a select that those who are capable, those who are consistent, and those who are able to give good advice to others, they will be respected and their opinion will be listened to. And those who've been around a while and have made mistakes, well, their opinion will be less valued. And then someone who's brand new has got to prove themselves, right? There used to be a concept called apprenticeship. Most capitalist countries have massively cut apprenticeships, but it's not a bad concept that people have got something to learn. If you went to a hospital for surgery, do you want the most experienced surgeon, or do you want a first year medicine student cutting you open? Right? I'd rather have the more experienced surgeon, to be honest, even though the first year medical student could be quite smart, but they're not experienced, and experience really matters. So leadership matters, but it is the job of the leadership to understand when is a time to slow down and debate, and when is a time to act. And if people don't get with the program, all right, they get left behind. There's no rule book that can tell you that. It's merely you have to build a capable, intelligent leadership that believes in the creativity and the democratic input of the ranks and of the working class as a whole, and doesn't just dictate to people.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, and it's how I think about revolution also in general. It's just like, yeah, things can go bad, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing it or taking a
Yes.
chance. Yeah, leadership can degenerate. Leadership can take advantage. Leadership can, in can concretize itself as fixed in forever, and not change and not be open to critique. But again, it's what other option do you have?
Actually, along those lines, just think of any other human activity, uh, okay, that you're going to take, and someone goes up to you, guarantee to me that this will go well. And I'm not doing it until you guarantee it will go well. I can't think of anything that is guaranteed to go well. Right? Actually, if someone comes up to you and goes, I guarantee you're going to make money on this investment,
You know they're lying.
you know they're lying, right? So someone who's guaranteeing you something that is going to go well is lying, right? You can't guarantee that in politics. This is a incredibly complex equation, right? You can't guarantee that. But if you set up that I need a guarantee, or I'm going to sit on my couch all day, or I need a guarantee, or I'm going to be a cynical bastard and not do anything, well, then you're playing into the hands of the ruling class, because then you've taken yourself out of the struggle.
All right, so we went on a big tangent there. Let's get back to Trotskyism. You talked about Bolshevism and how it came out of it. I guess we should talk about Trotskyism as a counter tendency to Stalinism.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of history. So, in my view, the Russian Revolution was the greatest event in human history, the most democratic event in human history. For the first time, the working class seized control of society democratically through workers' councils, ran it under democratic workers' control, and defeated the armies of white reaction and world imperialism. So that is amazing event. But unfortunately, due to the you know years of war and then more years of civil war, the working class was tired. People could only fight for so long before they just want to go home. So the working class, the best fighters of the working class, were either dead tired or dead in the civil war. And society had to still function. In the early years of the revolution, you had armed workers telling these old czarist bureaucrats what to do, because they were the only people who had the technical skills to, reading, writing, accountancy, stuff like this, to actually run society. But the workers were telling them what to do. Shouldn't forget that the literacy rate in the czarist empire was like 30%, right? And in the early years, the workers controlled the bureaucracy. But steadily, as the workers got tired, the bureaucracy started controlling the workers. And Stalin was the man who represented the wishes of the bureaucracy. Trotsky called him the outstanding mediocrity. And Lenin, in his testament, said Stalin is too rude and needs to be got rid of as soon as possible. Right, and that testament was suppressed by the Stalinists.
So let's pause right there. Maddock claims that Trotsky and Trotskyists argue that it was Stalin's nature which craved the centralized party machine and bureaucracy. So is Trotsky not saying that Stalin was internally motivated to be bad? That basically Stalin was a product of him being evil and having an evil soul? Is this not idealism? Is this maybe we're just doing psychoanalysis at this point of a bad person? And was Stalinism merely a symptom of him being a bad person?
Matic has got the causal relations backwards. So Trotsky wrote a really interesting book called Stalin. It was a biography of Stalin,
well,
and
the funny thing is he's citing this book, and
but Matic reads it upside down. There's a difference between reading a book and understanding a book. So Trotsky goes and talks about Stalin's character from what he knows of it. And it wasn't that the Soviet Union ended up where it was because of Stalin's psychology. It was the other way around. Objective conditions boosted up the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union, and the bureaucracy looked around for an individual that more accurately reflected their psychological makeup. So Stalin didn't create the bureaucracy selected Stalin from all of the psychologies.
Right. And so if it were not for Stalin, they would have found someone else to kind of represent and do their bidding, basically.
Exactly. Actually, there's an interesting thing of see Max Eastwood who ended up as an anarchist, but he was the translator of a lot of Trotsky's works, or translator of history of the Russian Revolution. And Max Eastwood, anarchist, said Trotsky was an idiot and he was head of the Red Army and he should have led a military coup against Stalin. And Trotsky replied by saying, Eastwood, great translator, terrible politician. And Trotsky explained, look, Trotsky could have led a military coup in 1924, 1925, maybe even 1926. Right, he could have. He was loved in the Red Army, could have led a military coup, but Trotsky explained, if he led a military coup, it would not be Trotsky in power, it would be the military in power. And then Trotsky would have to do the bidding of the military, a military police dictatorship. And if he didn't, well, then he would have been, and they would have put in a general who would do the bidding of the military. And you would actually have the Stalinist degeneration like a decade advanced from where it actually was because of Trotsky's coup. And Trotsky would have been a cautionary tale of what not to do, because history, again, in the main, is not made by individuals, although individuals are useful signposts. History is made by mass forces. Sometimes, yes, there are focal points in history that individuals can make all of the difference. But Stalinism was a social force. Actually, in terms of analyzing Stalinism, the people who have no analysis of Stalinism and the collapse of the Soviet Union are precisely the Stalinists, the Maoists. They refer to the sort of boogeyman, not great man, but despicable man view of history, that just, Gorbachev turned up and ruined everything and the Soviet Union collapsed. That's not history. That's not historical materialism. That's definitely not Marxism. It's demonology. Right? Whereas the Soviet Union collapsed for very good socio-economic reasons. And Gorbachev was the psychology of Gorbachev, if you like, was reflected the times. So he was selected by history rather than necessarily making much of history. Although individuals can make details, and Trotsky and Stalin goes into that yes, Stalin was selected by the bureaucracy, but because the bureaucracy needed an arbitrator in its internal affairs. But once he was selected, his personality colored events, definitely. Right? So individuals don't have zero effect. They obviously do. And it's a dialectical, complex interaction. But if you're asking what predominates, it's socioeconomic forces over individuals. And the psychology of individuals is typically selected. Yeah, I actually, if you look at Marx and Engels, and Plekhanov wrote about this. Plekhanov wrote The Role of the Individual in History, explaining how, isn't it interesting that, what is it? King Charles I, Louis the 16th, and Tsar Nicholas, if you read the history books, they have almost identical psychologies. They even have identical wives. And I don't think it's because you get a weak man with a strong foreign wife and then you're going to get a revolution. It's more, there's actually limited number of psychologies for crisis conditions. So the actual condition of crisis means that it doesn't matter what you do, it's wrong. You act resolute, you piss everyone off. You concede, give concessions, you encourage revolution. And so it leads to these weak individuals because they don't ever get to succeed at anything, and they picked a bad time to be born. Objective conditions have a big effect on psychology. Don't tell that to the pharmaceutical industry.
No, no, of course not. So okay, so then let's. So Stalin was basically chosen, or he was the right man. He was chosen by history.
The outstanding mediocrity, the bureaucrat of bureaucrats.
Right, and then so what was it about Stalinism that was so different than how Trotsky or the left opposition would have tried to run things? And is it true that Trotskyists say that if only Trotsky and the left opposition had won, everything would have been different. We would have had socialism, and USSR would have been hunky dory.
Well, Trotsky doesn't actually say that, and Trotskyists don't say that. In fact, the Stalinists were always going to win in the 1920s because of the defeat of a series of revolutions and the isolation of the Soviet Union in a single country. And then it starts becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy that the Stalinists put forward ideas like socialism in one country and opposition and the two-stage theory, which is essentially pushing the socialist revolution off forever. That is a philosophy that is entirely consistent with the bureaucratic mindset. The bureaucrat says, let's stop talking about revolution. It's very confusing and stressful. Let me work on grain quotas and steel quotas and telling people what to do. Right? That's much more understandable from a bureaucratic mindset. And so once the Stalinist ideology of the two-stage theory and compromising with world imperialism came about, well, that led to, well, there was serious mistakes in the German Revolution. So the German Revolution went down to defeat in 1923. And then you had the defeat of the British General Strike, where the Stalinists were actually, well, the British communists under Stalin's direction were not criticizing the British trade union bureaucracy. Then you had the two-stage theory in the Chinese Revolution of 26-27. That led to the victory of Chiang Kai-shek and the massacre of the Chinese Communist Party in the Chinese Revolution at the time. And all of these defeats demoralized the workers more and more and more and more. And ironically, the defeats of the Stalinists strengthened Stalinism, strengthened the bureaucracy, because it demoralized the workers more. And so they got out of politics, which gave more independence to the Stalinists. And Trotsky analyzed all these stages and said that from their mistakes leading to global defeats in the 1920s, in the 1930s, the Stalinist bureaucracy became conscious of its counter-revolutionary role and actively worked to suppress revolutionary movements, most notably the Spanish Revolution.
So had Stalin not made all these mistakes, or let's say Stalin, Zinoviev, Bukharin, all these people, maybe they caught the flu and died, and it just happened to be left opposition was the only people left. Can we imagine that the USSR did not degenerate into Stalinism, or what we ended up seeing?
The big pivot was the German Revolution. If the German Revolution had succeeded, we would have been living under world socialism for the last century.
So a left opposition, or a Trotsky-led USSR post 1923 would have still ended up in as bad as.
No. Sorry, you misheard me. Once the German Revolution lost, this was pretty much an inevitable history.
Right. Okay. Okay. I see.
Right. So the German Revolution could have won, and it was lost due to mistakes and inexperience of the German and Stalin and Radek, the communists involved. So it was human mistakes that led to that defeat. That there's nothing sort of inherently degenerated about the German Revolution, precisely the opposite. But there was mistakes. They could have won, and the price that the world paid was fascism in Germany and Stalinism in the Soviet Union. Whereas if it had German Revolution won, you would have had German industry combined with Russian raw materials. That would We'd be living in a socialist world now, and this would be a, a fun historical discussion of 21st century space communist academics rather than a burning pressure to build a revolution today, because the revolution would have all been done a century ago.
So then the argument then presents itself that, well, if everything really hinged, if avoiding Stalinism and the horrors of Stalinism, especially in the 1930s,
Mhm.
if all that hinged on the German Revolution succeeding, then was this not then is not Trotsky and Lenin equally complicit in their project ending up uh, in Stalinism, right? Are they not equally to blame for the horrors of the 1930s and Stalinism?
They did everything in their power to fight Stalinism. And in fact, the Trotskyists were the first to be sent to Siberia, right? So the people who say that, you know, there is a direct, that Stalin is the inheritor of Bolshevism, cannot explain why Stalin had to massacre the entire Bolshevik Central Committee from 1917 in order to put forward his policy. Because it was not consistent with Lenin's party. There was a one-sided civil war by the Stalinist bureaucracy against Lenin's party, who were liquidated by Stalin. Right? If it was the natural inheritors, then everybody from Lenin's Central Committee would have just evolved over into Stalinism instead of all of that blood and conflict. You might have, sort of hate to be postmodern and all the rest of it, but this is victim blaming. This is victim blaming, right?
That's right.
It's like the Leninists and the Trotskyists fought the Stalinists and lost, and now you're blaming those who lost because they didn't successfully fight. And in reality, when you're in politics, you don't know which historical period you're sitting on. You really don't know. And you only know that in hindsight. All you can do is fight. All you can do is make the best of the conditions that are in front of you and hope that you can win. And sometimes, and maybe if you hope, and maybe you can, but maybe you can't. And you can only see that from hindsight. Trotsky from the late 30s could look back at the 1920s and say, look, there was no way we could have won. We made, okay, could have corrected this or that mistake. It would have made no fundamental difference. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't know that. You just got to fight. And actually, even if you knew it, the fight has a utility. Somebody stayed strong. Somebody defended the right ideas. Somebody defended the right methods. Somebody is a point of hope. Hey, even Star Wars gets this. The rebellion exists in the underground so that when conditions change, then it is a spark that can light the flame. So it's all worth it, even if it maybe won't happen in your lifetime. Right? Everything is worth it in the global scales of history, if you want to make a difference to humanity in the long run. Of course, you might be dead by the time that happens, but I still think that's worth it rather than have a worthless life.
So let's go over a couple of the arguments that in fact Lenin and Trotsky really were paving the way for what became Stalinism from the beginning. Maddock suggests that Trotsky introduced compulsory labor service as a socialist principle, And later on under Stalin, the forced work became even more generalized and brutal. Trotsky defended the quote socialist characteristic of inequality at the beginning for quote those workers who do more for the general interest than others receive the right to greater quantity of the social product than the lazy, careless, and the disorganizers. Doesn't this justify the very bureaucratic privileges that Trotsky later blames for the rise of Stalinism?
Well, that's precisely the opposite of Stalinism, right? So I don't think Matic has actually thought about how a transitional society happens, right? You think, I guess he's not an anarchist, but many of his ideas are anarchist, in that this belief that you can just abolish wages, abolish money, or anything like this. The fact is that you can only have from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs, the statement of full classless communist society, when you've got superabundance of goods, when everybody's getting what they need, which is precisely the opposite of the Soviet Union in conditions of civil war, imperialist blockade, uh, military encirclement, right? So, and on that basis, if loyal workers work hard and others who are leaning on the possibility of the return of the imperialists and the capitalists and landlords, if others are disorganizing, of course you're going to reward the hardworking workers because there's a shortage and there's a danger. But that's not socialism, and Trotsky never called that socialism. Actually, it's very clear. Trotsky criticized the Stalinists when they called things like this socialism in his classic analysis of Stalinism called Revolution Betrayed. So Trotsky analyzed Stakhanovism. So that was the sort of the the Uberman, Stalinist Superman, proletarian Superman who, I think Stakhanov was this coal worker who had like 10 times or 100 times the output of the average worker or something like that. I forget exactly what it was. And so they rose up Stakhanov as we need so many more Stakhanovs to raise productivity. And they instituted piecework. And the Stalinists called this socialist piecework.
Mm.
And Trotsky in Revolution Betrayed said, look, given the horrendous socioeconomic conditions, piecework might be necessary. But let's not call this socialist. This is actually an incredible step backward. And trade unions in imperialist countries would never accept piecework because it's a horrendous condition for the working class. Marx analyzed piecework in Capital and explained how desperately exploitative it was. But Trotsky, again, not a idealist in an abstract philosophical sense, said, look, okay, you might have conditions where you need to put in sharp methods to get things done, but don't go prettifying it with the word socialism.
Right.
Right. And that's a summary of what he said in Revolution Betrayed. I haven't read it for a few years, but I could find the quote.
Well, yeah, I think Matic and a lot of these critics sounds like they could reread Revolution Betrayed, because they'll say, yeah, maybe the Bolsheviks had to do what they had to do for pragmatic reasons because of the conditions, and we can kind of sympathize with their position and their choices. But what they did wasn't socialism; it wasn't Marxism. So, why are they going around calling it that?
Well, it wasn't socialism in the sense of socialism being a class of society. Um, in the early stages, before the Stalinist degeneration, it was Marxist, and it was a proper Marxist understanding of the state. One of Lenin's greatest works, State and Revolution, explained how you cannot just abolish the state. Again, against this anarchist idea that constitutions and writing on a piece of paper are the motor force of history, the state rises because it recognizes social relations. And when there is a shortage, and this is the root of bureaucracy, actually, when there is a shortage in society, there needs to be a mechanism to manage that shortage. Capitalism is a very simple mechanism. There's a shortage. If you're rich, you get the thing. If you're poor, you starve. Right? So that is so prices are the mechanism, combined with state compulsion to make sure that the rich stay rich. Right? But a worker state cannot just pretend it doesn't have shortages. It comes out of capitalist society. So it has all of the shortages of capitalist society. And so, but instead of the rich eating and the poor starving, you have to come up with other methods. And that method is typically rationing. Right? You have a line, you have a quota, you have I guess on some things, a lottery if there's a shortage. You work to raise the productivity of labor so there isn't that shortage, but you can't do that overnight, especially if there's skills shortages. So, okay, we've got a rationing and a quota. Well, then you need people, if there's a line, you need a cop, you need a bureaucrat to keep that line in order. Otherwise, the strong will eat and the weak will starve. So, and the minute you've got a bureaucrat administrating that line, well, the bureaucrat has to get what's at the front of the line, otherwise they'll never properly maintain it. And that is the socioeconomic preconditions of bureaucracy. The communists actually had a communist maximum that you could not, if you're a member of the Communist Party, you could not get a higher wage than the worker. But Stalin got rid of that.
Now, didn't
Yeah.
Stalin and Trotsky increase the privileges of the bureaucracy way before
No,
Stalin?
Trotsky didn't. No, but there were wage differentials, but they didn't apply to. So if you were an expert, they paid experts more to stop them fleeing the country.
Right, workers, not the actual bureaucrats.
Yeah. So if you're an expert, you got a wage differential, and that wage differential initially was just 1 to 4. If you think about the wage differential in capitalist society, it's like 1 to 500. But the wage differential in the early Soviet Union was 1 to 4, but it didn't apply to members of the Communist Party. If you were an expert and a member of the Communist Party, then you did not get the wage differential because you were supposed to morally live on the same wage as everybody else. But again, and then Stalinists got rid of that, so that's one thing. But Trotsky was opposed to that.
The pragmatism and the so-called opportunism of the Bolsheviks. Trotsky and Lenin often used necessity and material conditions as their, quote, excuse, according to Matic, that to strengthen the party dictatorship and abolish freedoms. And then Stalin, so because of this, Stalin ended up offering the same reasoning, and so he's arguing there's no difference, right? Socialism in one country, for example, was necessity, right? No different than what Stalin what Trotsky and Lenin had done earlier. And even Lenin appeared to back the idea of socialism in one country in, I believe it's called On Cooperation, I think in 1923 or 4.
But although you consistently read Lenin, and Lenin is imbued with internationalism and world revolution in all of his writings, right? So you can, twist an individual paragraph to make it try and say something that the Stalinists want it to, but you take the broad breadth of the Lenin's writing, it's internationalist. Lenin founded the Communist International, for Christ's sake. Lenin founded the Communist International. For what purpose? And Stalin was the one who closed it down in 1943.
But can't we?
As a gift to the imperialists.
But can we not say socialism in one country was also a necessity, just like the previous kind of
No, I actually, from my reading of the Stalinists, um, I don't think it's ever actually written in that way. Now, some of the Stalinist explanations for their actions are the same arguments as Lenin made, but in different political conditions. So it's a false argument in one condition, but it's a necessity in another. Right. For example, in the Civil War and extreme crisis, then some very sharp methods had to be used. And the working class, the industrial working class, was a very, very small part of society. So you could there is a certain argument for taking very rapid action. But then the Stalinists made exactly the same argument in the 1960s and 1970s when the working class was the overwhelming majority of Russian society. There was no civil war. There was an increase in the standard of living, and actually, Soviet Union had one of the highest education conditions in the world, as opposed to massive illiteracy after after the First World War and in the 1920s and 30s. Right, that was turned around. The workers were far more educated in the 60s and 70s in the Soviet Union, more than capable enough of running society. But yet the Stalinists were saying, can't trust the workers, can't have workers' democracy. Right. So uh, necessity does play a role in politics. You shouldn't pretend it doesn't. And there's a sort of an old saying: every problem has a solution, but every solution has a problem. Right? So you go in one direction, and this is a lot of lessons of genuine Bolshevism, that they went through many different stages. And for example, Lenin fought for a disciplined party in 1903 and won the majority on that basis. But then the 1905 revolution happened, and a lot of Lenin's supporters were a bit insular and weren't willing to open up to the revolutionary workers in 1905. That's not a criticism of Bolshevism as much as a criticism of human nature, that people are inherently conservative, psychologically conservative, and what is correct in one period of time ceases to be correct in another period of time. And that is the job of an educated leadership, to be able to change tack, win people over, educate them of a different approach in different conditions. Sometimes it's time for patiently explain, winning over people and educating ones and twos. Sometimes it's time for mass politics. And if you do the wrong thing at the wrong time, you can destroy a political movement. If you do the right thing at the right time, you can go to great things. And Lenin made many mistakes, but at the end of the day, he made many correct tactical decisions and ideological analysis. So otherwise, he would not have led a party to power.
So Maddox's point, I think, is that every time necessity was brought up by into question by Trotsky and Lenin, it always broke one way, and that was in the direction of less democracy and less freedom.
No, I don't think that's true. It's definitely not true. It's not true prior to the Stalinist degeneration, and it's also not true in the founding of Trotsky's Fourth International. Right. In fact, there was incredible democratic flowering of ideas. Actually, in the first period of the Soviet Union, incredible democratic flowering of science and culture and art, uh, incredible development and experimentation. Lenin admitted that his tastes were quite personally conservative, but he was happy to see this incredible flowering. Some of it he didn't personally like, but it and you had the sort of Shostakovich, who did October, the filmmaker. Anyway, and in you have opera in genetics. It was there was fantastic ideological intellectual development, which the Stalinists cracked down upon. Who am I
Uh,
thinking? The filmmaker. Come on, you got to help me out here.
the from the from the 30s
From the
or
20s.
oh
Did
god.
did October, did Battleship Potemkin. Um, anyway, I'm sure somebody who's watching will know that.
We have a Donald asks, what do you think is the main takeaway of British Trotskyist groups um, from the last 70 years? And I'd also like to ask Alex his thoughts about about genderism and predominant as a predominant focus of the left today.
It's a bit of a which one first, Um,
Yeah, those are two very different things.
well, in terms of, I'll answer that positively rather than negatively. The the general tendency amongst the left in the post-Second World War period is to abandon the working class, right? If that, including the so-called leaders of the Fourth International, that from the 1960s onwards, they lost faith in the working class and started looking to movements, whether they be, feminist movements or uh, racial movements or nationalist movements, etc. Movements, rather than the working class and centralizing the working class as the leading force in overthrowing capitalism. Now, I'm not going to be workerist and deny oppression. Oppression is real. Oppression is incredibly important, and oppression has been a politicizing and radicalizing uh, factor in many movements in the last 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, etc. So I'm not going to, but fighting oppression in and of itself, you cannot fight oppression in and of itself. Oppression exists because it's part of a system. That system is called capitalism. Who is going to overthrow capitalism? Well, the people best able to do that is the multiracial working class and uniting all of the oppressed. So you centralize the working class. So the failure of the left is to ignore the working class and through intersectionality focus on this or that micro identity and micro oppression and negate the struggle against capitalism and understand that if they can get us fighting each other, we're not fighting them. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's my perspective on that. And you should fight oppression through class struggle methods because it doesn't benefit one part of the working class for any other part of the working class to be oppressed.
And
That, yeah.
what's the main his first part of the question? What's the main takeaway of the last 70 years of British Trotskyism?
Oh,
It's a
I don't think I can answer that briefly. So there's a huge history of the British left and British revolutionary politics. That obviously a key element is the Labour Party in Britain, and but now under Starmer and the purge of Starmer, of the purge of the left of Starmer, you had the very interesting development of Jeremy Corbyn, where the uh, the, the masses, especially the youth, flooded into the Labour Party and put Corbyn into power. But I guess if you want a lesson, a key lesson right now is the inconsistency and vacillation and lack of courage of left-wing reformism that Corbyn represented. So the so-called left that are reformists but not revolutionaries. The trouble with reformism is that it bases itself on capitalism and at the end of the day cannot make a break with capitalism. So when the left under Corbyn were in control of the Labour Party, they made every single concession to the right wing and were not prepared to break with the right wing and push them out of the Labour Party and of the Labour movement as a bourgeois fifth column. And whereas the right wing worked with singular aim and ruthlessness, and the minute they were in the driver's seat, massive Stalinist purges.
It's funny how that happens every time, right? The
Yes.
left of the Labour Party, the left of the NDP, whatever. They always try to make nice with the right and
Mhm.
the centrists of their party, and it's like the whole time that the the right wing of the party is always just trying to drive them out, with yeah, like you said, singular focus, and
Yeah.
they're playing two different games on two different levels, and yeah.
Yeah. And I actually, quote of Trotsky, betrayal is inherent in reformism. And, and this is not meant as demonology. By all accounts, Jeremy Corbyn is a very nice man. I don't know him personally, but I know many people who do know him personally. And I'm absolutely sure he's an incredibly nice man. He's too nice. That's the problem. And it's an ideology of reformism. Like, if you don't believe in eradicating capitalism, if you don't genuinely believe in a revolutionary overturn, then it forces you into all these
Yeah,
compromises.
this was Bernie's problem too.
Yes, and Bernie Sanders even worse, right? So it forces ideologically it forces you into all these compromises, irrespective of your own personal psychology, right? That is an ideological foundation. Whereas a revolutionary wouldn't have any problem with this because you see the right wing of social democracy, and they're just blatant, obvious representatives of the capitalist class and the workers' movement. Get them out. They are aliens. They are specifically an agent of the oppression of the working class. And so break with them. And that was actually one of the first conditions of the Communist International when Lenin founded the Communist International, was that it was the fight to separate from the reformists and what was known as the centrists, those revolutionaries in word but reformists in deed, who refused to break with the pro-capitalist reformists. So a whole series of clarifications were necessary in the early period for these, centrist, semi-revolutionary individuals and groupings that wouldn't break from the reformists. Because the Communist International, the Third International, said, look, if you're going to play a vacillating role, you are not with us because we need extreme clarity.
I want to bring in a couple questions from Derek Varn, who you went on his channel before. I asked him and a couple other people if they had anything to press you on. One of them was why was faction bans. Trotskyist parties, I don't know, I think it's all of them, or if not most of them, have a faction ban. It does
I
this.
don't think that's true.
Is it not?
No, I don't think that's true.
Well, does it not? Is it not partially, or at least mostly, responsible for the splitting we see, and what is the logic of the faction ban to begin with?
Well, there's the famous faction ban from the Communist Party in the early 1920s during the Civil War. And that was, again, unfortunate necessity of the Civil War because all of the other parties, excuse me, all of the other parties had, in one degree or another, joined the white armies, and they were taking terrorist actions against the worker state. And then any terrorist party gets the democratic rights of a terrorist party, which is none. Right. And so the worry was that pro-capitalist elements would then form a faction with the Communist Party as being the only legal party in the Soviet Union. But I don't think that I don't think actually that's a consistent observation of post Second World War Trotskyism, or actually even pre Second World War Trotskyism, that there's faction bands. There's not. There's a significant history of factions, legal factions, and a faction is sometimes a necessity, right? But it shouldn't be done frivolously. So a faction is part of democratic centralism, that if there is a substantive question, then two sides can formulate, put forward a perspective on that substantive question, and then it goes to a debate, and it goes to a vote, and then the factions dissolve. So that is how a healthy faction should occur, that it maintains the unity of an organization while allowing it a free debate. Now, sometimes factionalism becomes confused with individual personality politics, that power politics, this clique versus that clique. And people want a faction to have a faction because they don't like the majority grouping. And the ideas that are attached to the faction are purely accidental. So it should be a substantive political question, and it should be prepared, and those factions should be prepared to be dissolved once there have been sufficient discussion, verbal debate, written debate, sufficient time for everybody to make their mind up. It goes to a vote, and then it dissolves. And then the party can put in the majority viewpoint for a while. And if it ends up in a disaster, well, the minority then gets to say, told you so, and hopefully win over the majority.
So is it not
that's a healthy organization?
So is it not the case that the proliferation of Trotskyist splits was due to faction bans, and just because, like, if you have
no, that's not the actual history. Now there are anti-democratic methods used in various so-called Trotskyist organizations, but if you want to take a historical view of it, there's an objective and the subjective element. Unfortunately, the Fourth International was never a mass organization. It's never a mass organization, and the leaders of the Fourth International that Trotsky was trying to educate, unfortunately, Trotsky didn't have enough time to educate them properly, and they made every mistake. They misanalyzed the Second World War. The majority viewpoint was actually that the Second World War hadn't ended. It was going to be socialism or fascism within a year. Whereas Ted Grant's group said that in fact there had been a stabilization, a strengthening of both imperialism and reformism and Stalinism at the end of the Second World War, and unfortunately the majority of the Fourth couldn't cope with Ted making those critiques, and so they pushed him out. So that's a subjective element, if you like. But then there's the objective element that, given the 50s and 60s boom, the greatest, most prolonged development of the productive forces in human history, it was always going to be very difficult to be a revolutionary because capitalism was working, there was full employment. Many European countries instituted free education, national health, various sort of partial nationalization, stuff like that, that the reformists were putting through reforms, unlike the 20s and 30s when the reformists were attacking the workers and betraying. So it was always going to be very difficult being a revolutionary in those periods. So, and then if When it's difficult, then people argue over which way forward, right? So, when everybody gets to eat, if you want to sort of more of an economic argument, so when everybody gets to eat, everybody's happy. When everybody's hungry, everybody starts arguing, right? And so to be a revolutionary, especially to be a Trotskyist, 50s and 60s was incredibly hard.
One last question from Derek. Why does Trotskyism enshrine the post 1921 Bolshevik Constitution of the end of the Civil War period, which might be blamed for the rise of Stalin if you really want to prevent bad leadership?
That's it. Again,
Uh, why does Trotskyism enshrine the post 1921 Bolshevik Constitution in for virtually all the parties?
oh, you mean in terms the Constitution of the Communist Party, not the Soviet Union?
I guess, yeah, I think so.
Yes, because that was 1921 was an incredibly revolutionary and a time, an incredibly healthy time, development of working class power and the founding of the Communist International. So this is the best traditions of Bolshevism, the height of Bolshevism, if you like, and revolutions are popping up all over the globe, right? Inspired by the Bolshevik-led Russian Revolution. So yes, this is Bolshevism at its height and at its most healthy. So of course, yes, that is a model of a disciplined, united, democratic, and centralist revolutionary organization that will not unite with reformists or centrists that will capitulate to reformists and capitalists, and but will instill, yes, faction rights and democratic rights amongst the membership and amongst the working class. So yeah, that's an incredibly democratic tradition that I definitely hold to.
And can it not be blamed for the rise
Not
of
at all.
Stalinism?
No, socioeconomic conditions, the isolation of the Russian Revolution, starvation, 21 imperialist foreign armies. It's not in constitutions. History's not made by constitutions, damn it.
So that constitution, or not, a different constitution entirely, Stalin and Stalinism would have still.
Yes.
Right.
Constitution played the Constitution. Actually, I wouldn't I say the Constitution played no role. No, the Constitution played a positive role, but not positive enough. Right? It's a great Constitution, but no piece of paper can overcome human history. Right? Socioeconomic forces. Oh, we Marx historical materialism. It is classes, historical forces that predominate. Constitutions are interesting. Like the law, okay, related to constitutions is the law. Does the law decide? No. The law is merely a temporary written state of play of the class struggle at any one point in history. These things, the law gets pushed uh, to the left, it gets pushed to the right. And same as, if you like, trade union contracts. They get better, they get worse. Do you think the defining element of the class struggle is collective agreements? No. Collective agreement is merely the current state of play of the fight. And you could call a constitution, the law, anything like that. No written constitution can supersede the socioeconomic conditions that created it. Right? I could write down from each according to their ability to each according to their needs the most democratic constitution ever. And if there aren't the economic conditions and the cultural conditions and the education of the working class and the training of the working class to achieve that, it's fantasy land, total fantasy land, to be irrelevant. So it has to reflect socioeconomic conditions.
Okay, and all right, is there anything else we haven't touched on in terms of what Trotskyism meant then and what it is today? What are the main things we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I want to get out of history for a bit.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I want to get out of history because that's how a lot of these debates happen. Like, there's like, oh, Trotsky said good things, but then he did terrible, evil things, and therefore he's a bad man. Bad man. Lenin was a bad man too. Actually, I noticed all these people, they spend so much more time and effort attacking Lenin and Trotsky than they do Stalin. There's very little criticism of Stalin on the left, right?
That they,
And it's overwhelmingly against Lenin and Trotsky because that's where the danger is. That's where the power is. That's where the inspiration is, and the correct method is. Where there is a elemental understanding of the degeneration of Stalinism, right? And and so we end up debating history and history and history and history. But shitty things happen in civil wars. There's a radical concept. Civil wars aren't nice, right? Did you know that civil wars aren't nice,
I
right?
did not. No.
No, no, it's just like a game of chess or cricket or something like that. It's very, very gentlemanly.
Don't be mean to your opponent.
Exactly. So civil wars are awful and awful things happen. This is not the society that we wish to build. So, and there isn't. That is not a historical inevitability. In fact, if you look at the Tsarist Empire, 90% of the population peasantry, 30% literacy rate, in starvation, backwardness, everything. Is that the world we have now? No. The world we have now, we don't have illiteracy, we don't have an uneducated working class, we have an overeducated working class. For every 4 PhDs, there's only one job. Actually, that's an old statistic. It's probably worse now, right? The working class is incredibly educated, and the overwhelming majority of practically every country on the planet. So there isn't the the backwardness that stops a working class from running society. Actually, the working class already runs society. Most of the state functionaries who run present capitalist society are unionized. In Canada, Canadian Union of Public Employees. There's what's the federal one? Public Service Alliance of Canada, right? Same in the United States, overwhelmingly unionized, better paid, better organized sectors of the working class. Now, you'd have to get rid of management, but the workers already run society. You have to get rid of the capitalist management. The workers already have all the education and skills to run society right now. And we are the overwhelming majority of society. There's not the social forces reaction that existed in the 1920s and 1930s. There's not the sort of mass peasantry. There's not the petty bourgeois, wealthy kulak class or anything like that. That was the social base of fascism. That doesn't mean there can't be fascistic gangs or anything like that, but in terms of mass fascism coming to power, right? In fact, so the working class is the overwhelming majority of society. So if you can mobilize that majority in the interest of the majority, there is absolutely no need for any kind of civil war or anything like that. And then the sharp actions that inevitably happen through civil war. I may also note the hypocrisy that people don't really focus on sharp actions that occurred in the American Revolution. It kind of gets a pass. And there was a lot of unpleasant things that happened in the American Revolution. Many people were killed, especially, and if you talk about the American Civil War, which was the second stage of the American Revolution, then that gets a pass because it created capitalist society, right? So there isn't that need, and if you can lead the working class with decisiveness, with confidence, build a mass revolutionary organization, there is the possible for an entirely peaceful revolution through the mobilization of the overwhelming majority. And then I'd even be in favor of doing a deal with the bourgeois, right? So Actually, we can send Elon Musk to the moon if he likes, right? He go to the moon, one-way ticket,
Yeah, send him to
right?
Mars.
Exactly. But no, it's if you could do a deal with the bourgeois, give them pension them off, have them have, they can go live on Prince Edward Island or something and run the Anne of Green Gables exhibit. I'd give them a comfortable life as long as they never touch a gun or never tell anybody to touch a gun. I'd be okay with that, and we can get on with building a new class of society. And to sort of cut across the sort of the history of the demonology against Lenin and Trotsky, what it really comes down to is one, do you think that we need a revolution or can capitalism be reformed? And two, do you believe if you believe in revolution, that the workers need a revolution, then can it be done without organization? Can it just happen spontaneously and we don't have to do anything about it? Once you realize that revolution is the motive force of history and the workers need an organization to help them uh, achieve that revolution, to learn the lessons of past victories and defeats, so go straight to victory rather than make lots of mistakes that lead to defeats. Excuse me. Then you've got no choice but to get on with building it, right? And all of these naysayers and but this and give me a guarantee and blah 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 blah. I said like I watched the YouTube videos and I just sort of like just misery. And it was like, well, I don't have the answer. I don't know what to do, and maybe we'll dance at the death of humanity and the new Armageddon. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to accept that. I'm not prepared to accept that misery. And you know who's not prepared to accept that misery? The working class, right? So, I'm going to shit on everybody else's idea and everybody else's efforts, but I've got no ideas or efforts for myself. Well, that's, again, I'll bring it back to a sort of a medical analogy. Uh, you have a doctor, who is proposing a course of action, and then someone else just saying, "Don't do that, don't do that." It's like, what should we do? Just be miserable, just die, right? No, do something.
Do something.
Do something. And the most obvious something that you can do when you're not in a revolutionary period, is prepare for a revolutionary period by building organization.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Alex. That was I think we did it about an hour and a half there. So there will probably be more episodes and parts to this. Alex, do you think there's enough for to do what to do today, like a separate?
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Kind
Yeah.
of break it down in more detail.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll do that then. It'll be 2024. How does Bolshevism and Trotskyism apply there in a more detailed way? All right. Thanks everybody, and join us next time. Not sure exactly when that'll be, but have a good night.